Hey guys, Dark Humility here. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days a week of Diablo 2 action, D2R, PD2, and more. We do it all. We make every manner of build. We test everything. We just have a great time. Of course, you can always catch my build guides for both D2R and Project Diablo 2 on YouTube, and of course at d2.maxroll.gg for all of the highest quality written guides you can possibly get for D2R. Well, today, though, we have something insane, something that I was hyped about even before they officially announced it. The Terror Zones. D2R is getting a whole new overhaul system to its experience grind. Its 99 experience grind, which a lot of people have definitely been looking for. A lot of people have thought, man, there's only 3 monsters you can really farm on your way to 99 once you hit 98. Diablo, Nilithok, and Bale. And even before that, you're mostly just relegated to farming Chaos or World Stone Keep and Bale. And a lot of people, it's been like this for 20 plus years, and for a lot of people, it's not really too much of a problem. However, it is definitely something that reduces, the diversity of builds you can play in these areas. It definitely makes it a bit more mindless. You don't have to actually think about it as much, and just makes it less dynamic in general. And for a lot of newer players, and it's definitely a pretty big turnoff in terms of wanting to progress to 99 and race to 99 through the ladder, and to even participate in the ladders in general, because at the end of the day, if you've experienced that grueling, super ultra long 99 grind once, I mean, you've done it, enough times for a lifetime. That's how grueling it is. It could take months to get to 99, even for the fastest and most well-prepared players with professional groups and streamers and people of the like. Still takes like a week and a half, 2 weeks at minimum. So yeah, it's some grueling stuff. So I'm really hyped about this feature. I think it's gonna do a lot of amazing things. I do want to talk today about some things after testing it. I'm just fresh. I'm just fresh off of testing it on the 2.5 P2 PTR. We're just fresh off of it. We tested a whole bunch of builds and a whole bunch of these terror zones. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. But let's first talk about what I feel like they're doing really well in general with these terror zones. If you're not too familiar with exactly what this change is, I will post the patch 2.5 PTR link below this video, in addition to this document of thoughts about the terror zones as well, so you guys can review them and educate yourself as to what is coming and the hype behind D2R Ladder 2 for these insane, groundbreaking changes. These truly transformative changes that I would say make up the biggest change to Diablo 2 in over 12 years. So let's get started. Let's get into the meat of it. What is working well? I think in general, these terror zones seem to be doing their job of promoting the diversity of builds that can farm them, highlighting builds that maybe weren't ever highlighted before in areas such as Chaos and Bale. In Chaos, like fire builds are pretty much a no-go. Even for Bale, the last two Bale waves are very hostile to fire builds in general. You just get a lot of builds that totally get overlooked when it comes to the ladder race and the 99 grind. Most builds are looking for physical damage or magic damage or lightning damage for the typical meta 99 grind. And this is seeking to append that. You have fire builds now being able to crush, areas like the Stony Tomb, which can be a terror area, and you can get tons of experience from that, even more efficiently than Bale and Diablo currently. You can destroy cows with fissure. I mean, there's all these builds are kind of nutty in what they can do. I mean, fireball, all kinds of builds you would normally not farm to 99 with. It's now possible to do it with these builds. That is probably one of the best things about this change for sure. Um, we also have to consider here the diversity of areas farmed as well. So not only is it highlighting more builds for the ladder race and the 99 grind, it's also just highlighting more areas. Realistically speaking, 85 areas have always been semi-competitive in terms of helping out with 99. However, it's mostly been a game of chaos and bail, and once you hit 98, throwing Nilithok in there for good measure, as he does provide significant experience still at 98, which was always difficult to find significant experience. Very few monsters give that. Once again, be like Diablo, Nilithok, and Bale, because they are all very high level monsters, whereas the highest level monster you could get anywhere else was 88. So these are big. These are very big things. These are very big things. I think just making it to where all these areas that are usually overlooked throughout most of the game, throughout most of Hell, even for grinding items, experience, and loot, of course. I think this change really does a great job doing this, and it's going to keep people a lot more interested and a lot more engaged in the process of going to 99. And I feel like, people are really going to be like, dang, I actually got to think about this area. Is this worth me farming on this build, first of all? Do I want help with it? You know, uh, or should I just wait till the next one and just farm, good areas for me in the meantime? Like, you actually have to kind of strategize around these areas. I think it's great. I think it's great. Um, Definitely my biggest criticism of the current 99 grind, or the way it's been for pretty much the longest time, is that it's just mind numbing. It's very, it's very rote. It's very repetitive. You don't actually have to think about it too much. You don't have to adapt, and I think this change really forces that. Um, I guess we could move on to the next thing. That's the biggest thing, though, for sure, in terms of positives. I love the sound effects and the indicators for the terror zones. I feel like these sound effects are on point. And not only that, but all the indicators, including the chat messages, make it very clear when it's about to end, when there's about to be a new one. I think they did a really good job in this regard. I don't really have any criticisms about any of that stuff. The indicators on the monsters as well, letting you know that those monsters are indeed affected by the terror zone. Very, 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 very good indicators just in general. On-screen indicator, the purple word terrorize, just really good stuff. Really good standout stuff. Don't really have anything bad to say about any of that stuff. Um, 1 hour time-based rotation of a single area. I really like this concept. There's a lot of other ways you could do it. You could do it based on, people making a game, and the game itself could determine this. I think this could be too hard on the server, but on data storage issues and whatnot. So that's probably why they didn't do it. However, it also presents other issues like, people just being able to farm games created by other people and being able to choose the terror zones. I actually like the idea that you're kind of forced into a decision where it's like, do I farm this area with my particular build, or do I, instead think, okay, my build's not very good at this. Do I just farm other areas that are still good for my build and can still give me good loot and decent experience? So you're kind of forced into a decision every time. It keeps all the other areas relevant in the game, even though there's terror zones at all times, by having a 1 hour time based rotation to where you are forced to only do that area or do the other areas. So you're not always going to have an area that's optimal for you or your party or whatever the situation is. And so this is something that will keep the rest of the game relevant, even though the terror zones are active. You don't want terror zones to totally take over the game, because then people will only farm those, and I feel like maybe that's not what Diablo 2 is all about. Diablo 2 is about options. So I do like the limiting feature of it, and I do like that it rotates, and that you have a chance to farm something different within a certain amount of time. Um, but yeah, in general, you want to keep everything in balance. So I actually really like the 1 hour time. I like the time frame as well. I feel like it's reasonable, but it's also not to where it's super short and it feels like you're always able to get that perfect terror zone. Um, I feel like it's good for giving you a break from terror zones sometimes, and then keeping you engaged in it. So it's a good give and take. I really like that for sure. I'm a big fan. And of course, I think a really big thing that I think it does is that there's not a lot of like really ultra viable options when it comes to leveling between difficulties currently. I mean, you have Nightmare Eldritch and Nightmare Bale for getting to Hell. Maybe Nightmare Cows. If you also want to throw in some drops in there, you have in normal you have basically like normal Eldritch, normal Pendle. I mean, I guess you could say Pendle Skin for Nightmare as well, and you could also throw a normal Bale, but that's pretty much it. There's no real good transitional method to there's no really good transitional method besides those areas. So it's really nice that there's now like a new way, or there's new areas you can farm that can help you transition between those difficulties. It can help power level you, and that those are not the only options. So you feel like all right, I've gotten to this point. Now it's time to power level normal Eldritch for 3 hours. I feel like there can be a lot more to that, and I think they did a really good job by including them in Nightmare and Normal as well. Some people are a bit confused that they exist in Normal and Nightmare when this is a change that a lot of people see aimed at the 99 grind. However, I think this is a change that kind of just in general increases the dynamic options while you play the game, and I think it's a good idea, and just in general. So those are the things I think they've done insanely well. I am insanely hyped for this feature in general. I think it's going to make Ladder 2 insane. However, I do think that there are certain changes that can improve them and make the experience better for even more of the player base, and just make them better in general, and maybe better balance them as well so that they don't like totally take over the 99 meta and some other things, or just make it super trivial in some ways. So let's kind of go over what I did a lot of testing with. I did a lot of testing with players 1 and players 8. I had people join my games and whatnot, and I farmed in a party, with the players near me. I farmed, solo players 8, the terror zones, and I compared them to areas like Worldstone Keep and Chaos and whatnot. And the terror zones would win out hugely. We're not talking like to a small degree, but hugely around like level 94, 95 and above. Uh, they were really, really just so much better than anything else. They were even overwhelming in Players 1 to some degree. But in Players 8, like if you soloed Players 8 with a level 98 character, you could basically get a million experience at 98 in a single terror zone, which is crazy. 1 million experience used to be a slog fest at 98, or it is currently, I guess you could say, on the live patch. And it made it almost simple. Now, I have a bunch of different thoughts about this. So we're going to get to point one here. I think there's two major changes that, if they implement, are going to vastly improve these terror zones. It's going to make a big difference. And I want everyone that watches this video, or, watches my stream or whatever, I want everyone, just period, even people that don't watch, to push these two changes. If we push these two changes, they can be so much better. They can make these terror zones so much better. They really have a giant potential to make a big difference here. They want feedback, and you can give it in the form of providing that feedback with the button on the PTR itself in the character select screen. So you go there, you provide your feedback, you let them know you want these two changes. And I think after I explain these two changes, you'll see that they really would make a big difference. Um, for sure. I mean, they even said in the patch notes that this is an experimental change and that they want feedback. So don't feel like they're not going to listen. They will, as long as we're loud enough. So before it gets implemented in Ladder 2, these two changes are big. So let's go over number 1. I kind of gave a bit of an intro to number 1. So after testing these things, I kind of feel like the maximum levels, which it's currently at, the maximum area level of 96, so the regular monsters being 96, the champions being 98, which is 2 levels up, which is always what a champion is. Uniques are always 3 levels higher than the area level, so 99. I currently feel like it's a bit much. It's a bit much. I tested it out. It just seems like 98 was like flying by. Like as long as you could get a game full of people and you had gear capable of clearing players 8, it definitely felt like it was a little nuts. I would personally recommend reducing the maximum area level in Hell by 4 to 6 levels so the monsters are between 92, 94, 95, and 90, 92, and 95. That's still a huge, huge thing for an area to have monsters that level. It's still massive for Diablo 2. I mean, the highest highest monster levels you would get in any area were always 85, 87, and 88 besides those bosses, right? So what I'm proposing, I think it's a pretty modest proposal, is that instead of being this crazy, insane levels, just making these areas have monsters that are effectively 5 to 7 levels higher than anything that currently exists in the game is already transformative. I tested with lower level characters that created areas that were pretty similar to this, area levels pretty similar to this, and it was still massive. Huge experience gains. But it wasn't quite as broken, particularly between the levels of like 95 and 99 when you're grinding between 95 and 99. It didn't seem like it was quite as broken, especially for like level 98 to 99. There's a lot of OG players in my community specifically, and I know some people don't care. There's a lot of people who are like, who cares? Whatever. You're just salty. You had to work really hard for it in the past. Whatever, whatever. Yeah, you could say all that, but there's something special about, the grinds in Diablo 2. They're supposed to be difficult. It's supposed to feel insane when you find a GG item in Diablo 2. It's supposed to feel insane because most of the time you just find garbage. The only reason it feels insane to find something that is insane is that most of the time you find garbage. That's how the game works. And when it comes down to the leveling as well, I feel like, in order for that achievement to really feel insane, it has to be pretty insane. I don't think it needs to be as mind numbing, as time consuming, and as simple and, repetitive as it is currently. Absolutely not. However, I do think that with the introduction of more challenge and more adaptiveness and everything else of that nature, and reducing the time consumption but not necessarily making the time consumption like instantaneous, where like people can get 99 within like 3 days when the ladder lasts 4 to 6 months. I don't think that's a good thing. I don't think that's a good thing personally. I still think that even if the maximum area level in Hell of these monsters is reduced, if the cap is reduced, it's still gonna make a massive difference. They're still gonna be competitive with strats that were used in season 1 by the by the frontliners, the people abusing Diablo chaining, where they'd have people set Diablo and create a game in Players 8, and then they'd create a new game, and then you could just enter the game with the Diablo and just kill Diablo over and over again by joining through the friends list and whatnot. This stuff is still competitive with this. Like this is super competitive. I mean, this is more than competitive. Most of the time, this is going to exceed it. I just think what's going on here is kind of nuts. It's accelerating. It's too big of a change from this really slow mindless grind to arguably maybe in some ways even a too fast just quick like nothing kind of grind in some ways. So I think there's a happy medium we can find here. Um, so we don't want to excessively cheapen the achievement of 99. I think that's what we're trying to get at here. And historically, Diablo 2 isn't about easy achievements to begin with. So I think we can make it faster. We can make it more dynamic and more interesting without just totally flattening it, basically. Um, one thing though that I noticed is that even in Players 1, you're getting crazy experience from 95 to 98, even in Players 1 because the monster levels are so high, which means that you could even grind to 99 fairly quickly, even in just solo play. And given that in general you want to encourage grouping, especially for an achievement that's as big as 99, at least online, I would say. I mean, on single player, you can always manipulate the player count, right? That's just, that's the allure of single player. That's why single player exists. But, like, if you're online, I feel like you want to encourage people to help each other get to this goal. I feel like maybe that's another sign the levels are just a little too high. So I would definitely reduce the cap. That is the big first pointer there. Absolutely. Um, the next big thing is to put the terror in the terror zones. I like it. I like how it sounds, but it's true. Another very big thread, something I've noticed, not just myself having observed it and testing it, but a lot of people have said these areas don't really feel special enough. I mean, obviously the sound effects are amazing. Even the music and everything. It's amazing stuff. I think it's beautifully put together. However, um, it really does seem like to me that the areas aren't special enough. The monsters aren't special enough. It doesn't feel like an area that is truly terrorized. It just feels like a normal area that has indicators. Um, and of course, the monsters might have some, maybe minor increases in health and damage already because of their area level. I mean, because of their monster level. I'm not 100% sure about that, but it doesn't really feel that way to me. It feels pretty minor, all things taken into account. I tested it even on Players 8 with just, normal standard basic builds, things like Hammerdins. Hammerdins are good for testing like experience differences because they can kind of do all the terror zones currently. So like, yeah, I mean, I saw what I saw though was that it didn't really feel impactful enough. I didn't feel terrorized. I didn't really feel afraid. One thing that I thought could be really cool thematically, both thematically and what would really encourage people to look into how maybe maybe think twice about doing these areas, willy nilly. Maybe they have to stop and think about whether to engage in certain packs. Um, what could be very interesting is uh, making the monsters more dangerous, like particularly more dangerous. And I think the easiest way to do this, once again, this is a pretty simple change, right? Another very, very simple change that I think they can do is to add an extra affix to the unique monsters and the super uniques in these areas in all difficulties. So, in normal, they're going to normally have one affix, so it's one modifier. It might be spectral hit, for instance, right? And then on top of that, you'd get a second one in my proposal. A nightmare, they'd get 3 affixes instead of 2, and in hell they get 4, just like super uniques normally would. And if there are super uniques in a terror zone, you could give them 5. And I think this is actually a really cool idea because it would make these monsters, especially with all the different combinations that are possible, extremely dangerous potentially. I mean, maybe you could even make them roll 2 auras or something. I mean, you could definitely do some very interesting things and really make people think twice about just mindlessly smashing these monsters. Especially when the goal is to not lose experience on softcore and to not die on hardcore at all. Um, it's definitely a very interesting thing, and I think it would actually make it feel like a terror zone. Um, I really do believe this for sure. Like you could also the idea would be just to make them these ultra dangerous monsters and to really feel like they're a higher level and something that is really impactful to kill. There's all kinds of crazy combinations, of course, you can get with these things, but I think that's a very simple change that could be implemented that would make them feel uh, more special. Uh, Also, you could also give small buffs to all the monsters themselves in these zones. Maybe like a little bit more life or damage. You could do that on top of the affix if you don't feel like it's strong enough. I think the affix change though is really good. Of course, maybe buffing the champions a little bit, maybe the ghostly monsters especially as well. You know, things like that. You know, the champion type monsters, maybe buffing their stats slightly. I don't think it needs to be like huge or anything, just slightly. And another interesting idea that a lot of people have mentioned is maybe even increasing the making some kind of penalty in the area. So something that might be an alternative or something you can later on top of this is like increase negative enemy res on top of like the hell nightmare penalties. Um, or so normally you could even have some negative res. You could have maybe a damage debuff or even a damage reduction debuff, you know, some kind of global amplify damage sort of. Uh, that kind of stuff would actually be pretty cool. And it really would be an area that is terrorized and where, you know, the legions and the minions of hell truly have the upper hand, you know. I think those are all great ideas. You know, a lot of people have brought me some of these ideas. I thought about these myself, but in general, I think we need to put some more terror in the terror zones. Those two changes together really form, I think, what would make the biggest difference. Uh, Absolutely, hands down. I think those are the two things you really should push for. I also think they're simple to fix and they're simple to change, and it's something they can change before ladder. I don't think it would take that much time to do it, and I think everyone could get behind these changes because I think in general a lot of people will notice one, not very interesting or impactful outside of the fact that they're very interesting areas, but the areas themselves, you know, the monsters themselves don't really have anything supernatural going on. And then, of course, you know, the idea that it's maybe a little broken, especially for the 95-99 grind. I actually found that strangely enough, I actually found that the up to like level 90, these areas like from 85 to 90 were actually slightly worse than Baylor Chaos runs or just competitive. So I thought they were very nice in that zone. And even up to 94 to some degree, they were good. You know, they were good. They were better than Bale and Chaos in a lot of cases, but not so much so. It really is towards the end of that 99 grind at those ultra high levels that this current crazy cap really makes a difference. And I even tested with like lower terror zones than this by using lower level characters just to see, just creating with lower level characters just to see kind of exactly what we were dealing with here. And it does seem like, you know, it really is these caps that really break the game. The caps are just too high. Everything else felt really strong, impactful, and powerful. So I think that's good stuff. All right, let's go into the smaller impacts though. So there's some smaller stuff I definitely think they can do. I think this one's kind of a no-brainer, at least for me. I didn't see, so you know the play button in the character selection screen where you can just play and auto-create a game. I didn't see any option anywhere in the settings to make it to where you always create a game with or without a terror zone. I feel like that's something that could be added to the settings pool somehow instead of just in the lobby. I did like the option in the lobby, and that's actually something that I would even say on top of these things that's already working well is the idea that there's a way to opt out because you don't always want a terror zone. A terror zone can sometimes even mess things up potentially, especially if you increase the terrorizing of the monsters per the second suggestion. So the fact that you can opt out of this is actually really good. I think they definitely thought about it quite a bit when it came to actually implementing it, thinking, yeah, maybe some players wouldn't always want one of those. Maybe that's not a good thing. Making it to where the areas are normal and making sure there's an option to where that is possible is probably very important. So in general, I would just say, just add them to like the settings for the auto create. All right, one thing that's also I think kind of basic stuff, but I think something I noticed when I saw all the current terror zones. There's definitely a strong pool here, but I definitely think there's some areas that have a lot of potential that are being left out, like a lot of current strong 85 areas besides Chaos and Bale, and like Pit and Ancient Tunnels, and then also difficult areas like Swampy Pit as well. I think those could make for some very interesting terror zones and they really fit the theme very well as well. So maybe not, of course, absolutely every 85 area that currently exists, but I don't see a problem with including some of the ones that people like to farm normally, um, just to put them in the pool there for a special opportunity. I do realize that like the terror zones, one of the goals is to accentuate areas that people might not always normally farm. However, I also noticed things like Chaos and Bale are on the list anyway, probably so that those areas aren't totally left behind, um, despite maybe being out-meted in the end game from 95 to 99, which I don't see as a problem. Clearly, I'm even advocating for area levels that are still high enough to outcompete Bale and Chaos, especially at those top levels. However, I do think we can I think we can still increase the pool though. There's definitely more areas that maybe are being left out that don't need to be. Um, this one I think this is a change that isn't really related to the terror zones themselves, which is to show the item level on all items. However, it really the terror zones I think enhance the importance of being able to see the item level on items. And being able to see the item level on items is really important for things like crafting. It's really important for knowing what charm you can re-roll for that 41 to 45 life charm. And having these types of areas in the game, which produce really high level items, I think just increases the importance of this. And it's always cool to also be able to show off to your friends and whatnot. It's like, hey, I found this in a terror zone. It's clearly a terror zone area because it's a eye level, 92 item or something. And it's like, yeah, there you go. Or a eye level 95 item. And it's not from Nilithok. So I think that's really cool, and also maybe showing no, I found it not in a terror zone too. People can brag about that as well. So I think item levels are really cool. It's something that's been on single player mods for Diablo 2 for a very long time, and it doesn't negatively hurt the game in any way. I think this is just something that a lot of people would love to see the item level, or at least have an option to show the item level on items in the settings. I definitely could see it being a good option. Maybe not a default, but something you can turn on. That'd be very cool. Remove the monster level character difference penalty from attack rating. Okay, so this is actually something that I think that this is related to terror zones kind of tangentially, kind of like number 3. However, I think with the introduction of Terror Zones, you're going to see more of an issue with this, which is the idea that, when a monster is significantly higher level than your character, it'll be very hard to hit them, even with good attack rating. And with the Terror Zones, you can get these really high level areas that you simply can't even engage properly, even if you have good gear, you have good attack rating, and all that stuff. Only on attack rating based builds, like melee builds. I feel like maybe this is kind of a punishment for these builds potentially that's kind of added on top of an already a difficult playstyle. I would personally just advocate for removing this character level difference, monster level penalty, because it's not super fun. It's not super fun for melee builds. I even think this can bring some more parity for like uber killing for attack rating builds, that are not a smiter, for instance. So I think, like smiters, they don't have to worry about attack rating, which is one of the reasons why most people just make a smiter when they want to kill an uber. But if maybe, especially if they want to kill it early game with like a level 60 smiter, which is very possible, or even lower than that, you can kill it as early as like level 18 apparently. Um, there are videos out there. I'm just the messenger. The way I see it though is you can't even get close to that on maybe like a level 75 kicks in a lot of cases, because even with a ton of attack rating, it just doesn't cut it, because the monster level is just so much higher. And I think these types of areas are gonna make this problem worse. So this might be a good opportunity to remove that part of the calculation for attack rating. The other thing I would say is to make it possible for random magic immune guess monster. That a random magic immune guess monster can sometimes randomly appear in a terror zone. So this has definitely been a concern of a lot of people, in my community. Is that now that we're moving away from Bale as like part of a pretty central part of the 99 meta, that hammered ins are going to be uninhibited again, basically, except maybe in like one or two terror zones in the entire pool, which will mean that for the most part they can just pretty much shred everything in the terror zones again. And so, and they don't have to worry about a Bale Wave 2, for instance, most of the time anymore. So that's not something that's going to prevent them from just, killing things uninhibited and just taking over these areas. One thing I do like this idea where maybe having a random magic immune guest monster having a chance at appearing in the terror zone might be good for maybe toning down the supremacy of the Hammerdins and whatnot. Um, I definitely think that's not a bad idea. Definitely, because it's going to be such a common build already. I mean, even if you do this and add like a random magic immune guest monster like once every 5 to 10 terror zones, Hammerdins are still going to be really strong. So, I mean, just something to make it to where they can't always do it, and they might have to think about whether or not, just like every other build, pretty much has to think about whether or not they should do the terror zone. Would be good in the case of balancing that particular build, and maybe some similar builds as well. Um, and then number 6. Okay, so this is where power leveling kind of comes in, and it kind of brings like an idea of like where and what you kind of want to promote in terms of like cheesing the experience grind a bit. And so I kind of like the idea of an underleveled character in each difficulty, maybe having a major experience penalty in normal, so that they are encouraged still to level up in some standard ways still, like maybe tomb running and whatnot, and Tristram running. So there's more an encouragement of grouping once again. This is kind of the similar problem with these levels being super high up here. But one thing that this kind of creates is that people might not feel like they have to group at all, because they can just do a terror zone even at a pretty low level, and then they can just kind of smash it, and they can get crazy levels, and then they don't have to really worry about that as much. I do think if you create some experience penalties, maybe before level 20, maybe 40 in Nightmare and 60 in Hell for these areas, you'll encourage other more traditional ways of farming that experience, in addition to using the terror zones once you hit that level, and then really position those terror zones to be trampolines or springboards for the next difficulty, and not for just leveling throughout the leveling throughout the difficulty, or using it to level in place of standard leveling throughout the game, or in place of, I guess you could call it, standard progression. um so I think by doing this, you could accomplish that, and you could definitely you could accomplish all those things, and you can still make it to where these areas are going to be really good for trying to move on to like the next difficulty, but they don't really mess up the rest of the progression through the game, or they don't really like drastically overhaul it, if that makes any sense. It also makes it to where you can't just have like a level one get like even more insane experience than like can be gotten from Hell Chaos through glitch rushing. That's already pretty insane in a lot of ways, and I know there's like a hard cap at level 25 before you hit Act 5 normal. However, it could just get more extreme, I guess. I guess that's what I would say. It could definitely get a lot more extreme. And yeah, I don't think we need to make that any more extreme than it already is. So for sure, I would definitely yeah, because those area levels are insanely high. So, and not only that, there's also another element to this is I don't think these are the kind of areas you want people leeching. I think these are the kind of areas you want people like pushing with you, where you can do it as like a team effort. It doesn't really feel like an area where you sit there with like an Ondel staff or anything, because a lot of these areas are a lot bigger, they're more spread out. I don't think we want to encourage that in general, just because it's going to be really janky in general. So I don't know. I think having like experience penalty caps wouldn't be a terrible idea. There's a good number of reasons. I've stated them all pretty much, but yeah, there's definitely a decent number of reasons why I think that might be the case. And then one thing, this is an anti-cheese thing. So this is a this is like an anti-cheese. So one thing I'm kind of concerned about is that what might end up happening in this ladder two race, especially among the top streamers and other people, with the connections, is that what's probably going to happen, at some to some degree, is there's going to be a really good terror zone. Let's call it the secret cow level. I don't think that's too much of a stretch. Maybe even Worldstone Keep. That's definitely another possibility, where it happens for an hour, right? But then they can kind of extend the life of that terror zone by just like spawning the monsters before it ends in players 8 in various games, and then keep creating games and keep having as many people holding these new games as possible, as they kind of just farm up these games with players 8. And they get as many people to do this as possible, and then they just literally sit on basically a pre-spawned players 8 area, with these monsters that are still the same level as they were when the area was terrorized, but maybe not so anymore, because it's impossible to actually clear all these areas in an hour. But they still maybe are able to get through like 100 cow runs that were previously terrorized, because the monsters were pre-spawned, and then they're just able to farm crazy amounts of experience that isn't really accessible to the vast majority of the community. And so, what I would do, and I know this isn't like a perfect solution, but I would definitely like try to control this to some degree, because I do feel like this could definitely happen. And I would even venture to guess they're already planning it. So yeah. What I would do is I would reset once the terror zone is the corruption is fading, and once it's faded completely. all monsters in the area, regardless if they've already been spawned. So someone's gone within 2 screens of them. 2 600 by 800 screens, the old screens. They've gone within, they've gotten close enough to them to spawn them all. Even if someone spawned them all in Players 8, it would reset their area. It would reset their monster level to the standard area level, whatever the monster level they're supposed to be, without the without the terror zone. And so I think that would be good, because then even if people are pre-spawning games for them, they're not able to just hold those games indefinitely even after the terror zone expires. And I think that would help to maintain the integrity of the system a bit. So yeah, I'm not even sure if it's already the case. It might already be the case that the monsters are reset, but I don't think so. It does appear like that's not the case. It appears like if you pre-spawn them and they're not terrorized anymore, they're still spawned as terrorized. So there would have to be a way to reset the monster level of all these monsters in the area once it is no longer terrorized. The second that is the case, they should be reverted 100% to prevent these abuse scenarios. And last but not least, there's a couple of fairly prominent ideas that I've seen people have been floating around that I don't think are good ideas, and I'm pretty much going to tell you why. So, multiple terror zones instead of just one. I actually originally thought this might have been a good idea. I'll go out there and just say I was pretty convinced of this, that it would be pretty good. But I was wrong, because the more I tested it, the more I thought about it, the more I realized that it would just discourage people from choosing between terror zones and other areas in the game, and it would further entrench terror zones as like the only thing people want to do, and would also disincentivize people to farm the quote unquote not the best terror zones, because they'd always be overshadowed by the better ones. So I decided that was not a good idea. I thought of originally that it could be a good idea, because maybe people wouldn't all be trying to pile on one zone in every game. But I think there's too many drawbacks to this, and it doesn't. It would kind of undermine the current purpose of terror zones in a lot of ways. So I don't actually support that idea. I was thinking it could be good when I first started testing earlier today, but that's not the case. And then of course, this one's been suggested a few times, maybe as a way to, spice things up and make it a bit more spicy or terrorized, was changes to monster immunities, maybe adding more immunities, but then this would just make it even more frustrating, especially for solo players to do. So I didn't think this is a very good idea, because I do believe you should be able to farm them solo 100%. Just depends on your build and your play style and your strategy and everything else. Should be possible. So I don't like that idea. I also don't like the idea of doing something like the reverse, which is like removing the immunities in these areas, because then you would make them too dominant. As a matter of fact, you would also kind of negate the whole function that immunities currently serve in Diablo 2, which is to promote build diversity by virtue of, certain builds being better at farming certain areas because of immunities. And, certain areas being very strong for certain builds because of that. And trying to, like, switch up builds. Switch a lot of the part of wanting to play new builds is that you get to play new areas, and vice versa. And there's different stuff you can do with different builds more or less effectively, which I think really helps out the dynamism of the game, and it prevents those really strong builds, especially those density clears, like the Lightning Fury Amazon, for instance, from really running wild and just wrecking the game, and no one ever really wanting to play anything else, because there's no reason to, because there's something that clears the fastest, period, and there's nothing else that can compete with that. I think immunities serve that function very well, and if you create areas that are very meta for a very meta activity in the game, such as 99, or very, very ultra strong for loot, or the strongest for loot in general, you can't remove the immunities. I don't think that's a good idea either. But I've seen that idea floated as well. But that's basically it. That's it. Those are my thoughts. Hope everybody enjoyed. You can always catch me at twitch.tv/Dark Humility for 6 to 7 days of Diablo 2 action. Make sure to check out all my guides on YouTube and on Maxroll. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let me know if you have any other interesting ideas. I will post this document and the notes in the description. Once again, I'll see you guys. Dark Humility over and out. See you guys next time. Let's get it. Ladder 2. We gotta smash.